All right, hello. Welcome back to Art Explorers, discussion on non-Western art. Today, we will be talking about gender and sexuality with our lovely person, Dree Costanzo, our lovely friend here. Dree, just introduce yourself. This is already a time.
Hi, my name's Dree Costanzo. My pronouns are they, them. I am a creative writing and literature double major. I'm hoping to go into queer studies and queer theory, and I research a lot about queer things.
Yeah, so I figured they would be an excellent addition to this podcast. I didn't say this before. My name is Kaden. You met me in the first episode. This will be a great time. Okay, today we'll be talking about gender and sexuality, like I said. Normally we try to focus on one region. This time, while researching, we kind of found out a pretty fair amount about artists in the Middle East, which is interesting because the Middle East is not known for being particularly friendly towards LGBT people, as you probably have figured out. All right, let's start this by, we both look at a lot of sources. Let's talk about our favorite things that we found. I'll have Dree start.
I think my favorite source was the 10 artists in the Middle East because you really got a feel for how diverse, like, the, I forget what was it from? Culture Trip. The Culture Trip article had, like, so many different forms of women in art. And what was fascinating to me is, I think from a Western perspective, so much of the time we think that everyone's story in that country is going to be like this sad sob story, and like it's kind of like that colonizer Western savior mindset almost, where like people perceive the Middle East as this horrible place where no one can thrive. But so many of these artists, their art doesn't focus on the sadness or whatever that Western people might think that it would. Like, it focuses on their daily life and like just the beauty of their culture. In so many different ways. And I think that was not surprising or anything like that, but it was just good to see the like range, because there's so much art, there's so many artists out there from the Middle East that so many Americans never hear about. And I thought that the article was
Absolutely
fascinating.
Especially coming from culturally, it's very easy to look at another country that's very different and say, "Ooh, that's bad."
Yeah.
I don't think it's a white bias. I was going to call it a white bias, but it's a very just like different culture bias.
I think it's like a very global north perspective.
Global north specifically, that's interesting.
Yeah, so so in post-colonial studies, instead of saying first world, second world, or Western and Eastern, the new vernacular is global north and global south. So what would have been considered quote unquote developing, which centers, a country's kind of global value around capitalism and how much they can contribute to capitalism by calling them developing, you would say global south would be countries that have been colonized or have been negatively impacted by colonization, where global north countries are the countries who often did the colonizing. So Canada, US, Britain, places like that, Australia, even though that's in the global south, it was a British colony. So that's kind of the new vernacular, is like, instead of saying developing or first world or second world, it's global north and global south.
That's good to know. I've never heard about that. Thank you for explaining for both me and listeners.
Yeah.
That's really cool, actually. It's always interesting to watch how vernacular around things changes. But anyway, I like this article too because the article that's being discussed specifically is the top 10 female artists from the Middle East as named by culturetrip.com. There's a couple that I highlighted specifically because they talk about gender politics and stuff like that within the Middle East. But it's also just a really good place to look at artists. If you are interested in learning about new artists, definitely click on the link. It should be somewhere on our Spotify, or if you're listening to this on YouTube, it will be in the description. But I'll make sure that we have access to all of these wonderful links that we found over research. One name that you might actually remember is, I believe, Shahzia Sikander was on this list somewhere. She's known for kind of talking about, I believe she's the artist who wrote pieces of the Quran over the person's face.
Yeah.
And it's like
yeah.
a Muslim woman, and there's like a gun dividing, or I believe it's a gun. I don't know. I shouldn't be talking about this because I don't know the facts specifically, but she's a well-known artist. Other artists that I highlighted specifically for our topic are Shirin Neshat from Iran, who talks about gender politics in Iran, memory, religion, and violence. She kind of explores that in her work. Another person was Emily Khasir, or is it Jasir? Unfortunately, I probably should have looked up how to pronounce the names accurately, so I apologize if I'm butchering them. But she's a Palestinian rights activist. One thing that stood out to me that she said was, people have no problem claiming agency to speak on our behalf, which is funny considering what Dree just said. So her big thing is, if she could do something for you in Palestine, what would it be? Because she's a Palestinian artist. And I believe people moving in and out of Palestine is an issue. It's often not a thing that can be done, really. So her big thing was, hey, like, if you want to do something with someone in Palestine, I'll do it for you because I know you can't. So my favorite thing that I saw was she played soccer with some guy's brother because he couldn't go. But anyway, I digress on that one. It's a good article. Check it out. Let's see. Another thing to talk about, especially in regards to the Middle East, is Dree actually found some stuff about something called pinkwashing between Iran and Palestine.
Yes.
Okay, we should probably start by making sure listeners are informed on at least what we know about the Iranian-Palestinian conflict. Please always do your own research. Make sure that you look at reputable sources, but go ahead.
Yeah, so if you don't know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been going on for quite a few decades now. Israel was established after World War II by the United Nations, and that effort was mainly led by the U.S. president at the time. I'm going to look really stupid because I don't know which president that was.
It's okay. This is why I say please also do your own research independently.
Yeah, I know all this other stuff, but I do not know the name of the president. I believe it was Eisenhower, but I can be also completely wrong. I'm not a history major, okay?
Definitely fact check. It's okay.
But the United Nations, in this effort led by the United States, basically wanted to establish a Jewish state. So they marked off this territory, and it was what we know as Israel. But the thing is, they didn't ask the people who already lived there if they were okay with that. So it was a lot of people see it as this act of colonization of, all these global north countries like the United States and its allies like Britain and France and, all that stuff coming in and like switching these people's lives around when they had absolutely no idea about any of the politics or conflicts that already existed in the region. They just said, here's a state for Jewish people. We're done. That's it. That's the end of the conversation. And so the Palestinians were like, hey, this is like our land. Like, we have a claim to this as well because it is like religiously significant to both groups. And the UN was just kind of like, no, sorry, you don't. And so that's where the conflict stems, and it's just kind of grown over the past couple decades since the end of World War II. And the pinkwashing aspect actually really came into play in the early to mid 2000s. It's more of a recent phenomenon where global north media, like mainstream media in the United States, started to report more on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And a lot of people in the global north didn't like what the United Nations had done to the Palestinians. And so to kind of garner more support for their side, Israel started this marketing campaign, basically. It was very propaganda-based, saying, well, we like gay people. This is a place where gay people are free to be gay, and it's a haven for the gay people. And you can look up these commercials, and it's like it's strictly targeting this like neoliberal like mindset of like, well, we're like progressive and open towards gay people, so we are the right decision, we are the right choice. You want to be on our side because we support gay people, and the Palestinians are homophobic and their culture is bad, and they do this to gay people and all this other stuff. And that was this marketing campaign that was widely circulated across the world, and it really made a lot of people at that time not want to support the Palestinian cause of their liberation, because they saw them as like these conservative homophobic people, when that isn't true. It's propaganda circulated by Israel to kind of gain public support and improve the public's opinion on the Israeli state. So it's a phenomenon that happened for quite some time, and it's still impacting the way people see Palestine, really, because it was just so I guess ingrained in people.
I mean, yeah, part of propaganda is knowing your audience and kind of exploiting that.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, propaganda is all sociology. You figure out what brains are listening and do what you can to influence them. You said you got this from a documentary?
Yes. So in my queer studies class that I'm currently taking, we watched a documentary called... Yes, it's called Pride Denied. It came out in 2016.
Nice. Good to know.
It's about homo nationalism and the future of queer politics. And it's not just about the pinkwashing, but it does have a very good section on talking about pinkwashing.
Nice. Do you know where viewers might be able to find this?
We watched it on Canopy, which I believe every Capital student
that is true.
Has a Canopy account.
I believe you just log in with your credentials and go from there. It's a really great resource for stuff like that. Plus, that one documentary on Vincent van Gogh, made entirely out of oil paint. Not documentary, but movie.
Yeah.
Made entirely out of oil paint. It's so cool.
Yeah,
but anyway,
that was really good.
Check out Canopy for that documentary if you're interested. Kind of going off discussion on the Israel and Palestinian conflict, I also found this source of kind of comparing two the title is Anthropological Perspectives on Two Documentary Films on Women in the Middle East. But a lot of these documentaries, one of them kind of looks at women protesting at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem in Israel. A big thing there, kind of part of the discussion with that, is that women are able to protest at that wall, and it was a big thing. I don't know. I guess I don't have a ton to say on it, but it felt important to bring up. I don't know if you're interested in hearing more about that, but the thing that piqued my interest most was that it seemed like an interesting commentary on anthropologists needing to be vulnerable when talking about their work, especially because they're discussing human behavior in social situations. So being honest about their place there, kind of like a participant observer paper, if you've ever done that. You're being placed in a situation where you probably don't fit into the quote-unquote in-group in that area, but you have to be honest about your feelings, the people around you, what they're feeling, what's going on, and not putting bias into that. An objective voice is difficult to achieve, I think, sometimes, especially for people who want to talk about what they're feeling about a situation, but it's important to achieve sometimes. And I don't know, I just wanted to touch on that, I guess. Moving on from that, though, we also found this other article about an artist named Alireza Shojayan, who is based in Jordan now? Lebanon. I lied. It's Lebanon. I'm so sorry. But he was born and raised in Iran and went to school there, but he couldn't exhibit his work there because he is a homosexual man who makes art about being homosexual. In Iran, just to put this in perspective, homosexuality is a capital offense since the Islamic Resolution of 1979. It results in execution for men upon your first offense if you are found, copulating with other men or accused of it sometimes. The interesting thing about that, as a total side note, is for women, you basically get 3 chances to stop being gay. If you're found out, you're flogged the first 3 times, and then the 4th time is when you get killed, which is a really flippant way to discuss that. I'm sorry, but it's really cool to hear his voice. He's had kind of a rough time, and he's very upfront about this article, about it in this article called it's from we'requeerhere.com, Portraits of Queer Love and Life in the Middle East. He pretty much had to move to Lebanon in order to legally get his work out there. If he had displayed it in Iran, he would have been arrested and probably killed, most likely. This is also solidified by the fact that he had a friend who lived there, who was murdered by a jihadi subway man because they met up, and basically when the guy realized that it was a trap. They met up and went home together, and then the jihadi killed him because he's gay. His sister, in order to keep this friend's honor intact, told his parents that he died of a heart attack and not of someone brutally murdering him, pretty much. So it really paints where he's coming from. Looking at his artwork, he talks about the shame of being a gay man in that situation. One of his pieces that always sticks out in my mind is a man sitting down and peeling a carrot in front of where his penis would be. Yeah. And it's kind of like this discussion on demasculation, and I don't know. You just have to look at his work. Not only is his work on this website in the source that I will put somewhere for you guys to look at, but he's also on Instagram, I believe. I'm not so sure that you'll see a lot of his gay work. This seemed like a very one series kind of thing, which I don't blame him for. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's very poignant. How do you say that word? Anyway, poignant? You know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's a weird word. Anyway, his big thing is that, yes, it's terrifying, and yes, he's scared, and a lot of his, I believe, definitely check the article for this, a lot of his family actually disowned him because he started displaying this work. He probably can never go back to Iran. His whole thing is that the responsibility of an artist is to not be afraid, to be provocative, and to talk, which I honestly can't agree more with, because I think that art is a very important form of communication that reaches a lot of people. But I could go on about that for a while. The other thing that stood out to me was that during this period when he's making his art, which is the present day, it's interesting because since the internet was invented, basically, these ideas can travel transcontinentally pretty easily. Some of his work is based off of an older LGBT activist, and I believe the 60s or 70s. I could be undercutting that. It could be the 80s. But Robert Maplethorpe is someone that he modeled himself a lot after. Maplethorpe is known very widely for making photographs of being a gay man in a time when it was very not okay to. Ali Reza probably saw that and saw a fellow guy and was gay man, and was I want to be like this, and it's important to talk about. As a result, he actually modeled a piece after a photo that Robert Maplethorpe did of 2 men dancing in public view. More specifically, he made what Robert Maplethorpe took a picture of 2 white men. He made it into 2 Middle Eastern men dancing. And that it's such a simple image, but it says so much, I
think it speaks to how important representation is and can be. You might not be able to relate to every single aspect of an artist, but he found this one artist, and it guided his artwork. And even though they come from 2 different countries and 2 different racial backgrounds, it's still the unity of being gay in that situation. It's that visibility was so powerful in that moment.
Humans are pack creatures, and our voices are bolstered by others around us who agree.
Yeah.
In order for conversations to happen, they have to start. And it's difficult conversations are something that everyone avoids, I know. But they have to happen. And I think Alireza Shojayan is like just a very important guy for that. It's always cool to see people like the influences that artists take from other areas, but yeah. Speaking of gay artists in the Middle East, though, I do want to bring up something that I actually found out about. There's a very well-known poet in Iran. Don't quote me on that. Actually, I shouldn't even say but his name was Abu Nuwas. I'm definitely saying that wrong. But he wrote like thousands of poems about basically how hot men are. I kind of wish that I could read some, but you just snap your fingers. It was just funny. Basically just about how hot men are. And he was very well known, I believe, 16th century. Don't quote me on that. Check the article, How Homosexuality Became a Crime in the Middle East by The Economist for specifics on that. But he was very well known for being a gay poet back in the day. I wrote poems instead of poems on the document that we're looking at. Anyway, erotic poems. He was very well known for writing a bunch of poems about how hot men are back in the day, pretty much. And then when the uprising happened, like I believe the Islamic Revolution happened, like 6,000 volumes of his poetry were burned. Actually, specifically, it says in 2001, the Egyptian Ministry of Culture burnt 6,000 volumes of his poetry in an effort to suppress him, which actually goes back to that discussion we were having about representation and why it matters. Yeah. People try to get rid of literature like that for a reason.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's literally like what you said, like humans are pack creatures, and we're bolstered by seeing other people who either agree with us, support us, or are like us.
Yeah.
And so, like, if they're burning something in an effort to suppress it, you know that media was important in some way. That media had an impact on many individuals to warrant the government taking action and burning it.
The other thing about that, too, is that it takes the language away from you. And if you don't have the language to talk about something, it can't be discussed. Mm-hmm. So if they're taking away the language to be homosexual, if they're taking away these things that make you feel seen and heard, like, it's killing. And that's why censorship is such a big thing. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, something to learn from this is that, it seems that there are cultures in the Middle East that are very good at, not very good at, but they censor things. By getting rid of it.
Censorship, effectively
censoring. Abu Nuwas, obviously a very big name, just recently got rediscovered. I don't know if that's the right word to say, but basically uncovered again because he was very prominent back in the day. He's also not the only poet who did stuff like that. I don't have their full names written down, but these two men, Rumi and Hafiz, in the 13th and 14th century wrote, as I wrote in the notes, gaily, but
gaily.
Basically they very specifically talked about how hot men are too. And I'm saying that very flippantly, but it's a genuine discussion. Like they were gay, and perhaps there wasn't the word for it because obviously language changes over time. But looking back on it, you're like, oh yeah, these men loved men. Yeah. There is no shade, like absolutely. So it's important to keep in mind, like, the artists that influence that area and what has happened to them. Like, it's not like being gay just recently became a thing. It's just that the conversation is reopening because people are demanding that it be reopened.
And I think it goes back to what you said, where language is so important. If you don't have the language to discuss something, you can't have those difficult conversations. And how can you explore something that you can't talk about? And I think... when people bring up, well, all these terms are so new and like this didn't exist back in my day or whatever, when talking about LGBTQ identities, just don't realize that these things have always existed across the world. Just now we have the language to describe these feelings and these aspects of our identities that we didn't previously have. And so, seeing poets from the 13th and 14th century describe this, it's just proof that, like, none of this is new. It's just we have the language now, and some cultures still don't have the language that we have in English, but...
And that's actually why I think it's important to look back on old literature and art, and the term for this is queering. Mm-hmm. Forgive me, listeners, if there's anyone out there who's from an older generation and queer is a difficult word to hear. We use it in the younger generation as like a casual term for the LGBT community. If this bothers you, please let us know. Send us an email. But that's why I think queering art history and literature history is so important, because there's things they weren't able to discuss back in the day because they didn't have the words for it, and they tried so hard sometimes. Yeah. Like, thinking about, like, Emily Dickinson's letters to, like, I don't think she was able to say, like, I'm in love with you and stuff like that, but we look back at that and we're like, you a little fruity.
No, every English class is like, Emily Dickinson was a lesbian, and this was like, yeah.
But it's not like that was talked about back in the day.
Right.
Now, that's a very, like, simple, just kind of funny example. There's also things where it's like, this needs to be talked about because it was very relevant and they weren't able to say things about it then.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, when you're looking at queer history, LGBTQ history, so often the genders of the people that you're talking about, like, they say, oh, they were like a masculine presenting woman. Well, were they a trans man, like, and just didn't have the language to describe that? Were they, like, actually a masculine lesbian? Were they actually a straight man, or vice versa, where it's, not really vice versa, but, like, this person didn't conform to normal gender roles. Could they have been non-binary, and they just didn't have that language? So queer history and queering history gets peculiar in some ways because we're trying to apply today's language in a time where they didn't have those languages. They might not have identified as a transgender man, even if they did have that terminology back then. So it gets interesting.
It gets interesting, and it sucks too, because it's not like you can just go back and ask them. I wonder sometimes what would happen if we told them about the language that we use these days. Like, either they'd think it's stupid and sometimes unnecessary because it wasn't an issue, or like they'd be like, oh my God, thank you. I mean, I think of myself discovering myself piece by piece. Like, I thought that I just liked girls, and then I realized that I was trans once someone came out and I started understanding their feelings and being like, whoa, this is a little too relatable.
Yeah, and it goes back to representation is so important. That
representation.
Visibility is so important, because we have to know that it is a thing and you're not just, like, tripping, you're not crazy. It's like it's a thing that, like, So I think it's all the terminology, the language, it's all very relevant. And I think it speaks volumes when a government tries to censor that language, because they know it's important. Everyone knows. And
the other important part of this discussion, too, is that, yes, these concepts aren't new. A lot of, there's little bits and pieces that you even find in the Bible if you're a Christian. Apparently angels closest to God are supposed to be genderless. Now, I can see how that affects the discussion on non-binary people. Perhaps some people think that non-binary people are trying to make themselves godlike in status when they're not. But I don't know. That's up to you to decide. It's not like that at all. But the concept of genderlessness or not identifying with male or female is not new. Mm-hmm. I also have heard, I don't have a source for this, so fact check me.
We're going off the cuff now.
We're going off the rails. Wild. And I've heard that the earliest translations of the Bible don't refer to God with any pronouns, like with any binary pronouns. He was a very genderless being, and as it got retranslated over time, which the retranslation of the Bible is something to talk about in general, but as it got retranslated into languages that don't have a third pronoun, like, he just kind of acquired it, and that's how we discuss it in English culture.
I mean, our very good friend and coworker Abby Bebout wrote a scholarly paper about the history of epicene pronouns, which is gender neutral pronouns.
It was a good paper too. I read it.
It's really good, and apparently the Catholic Church has said in recent years that God has no gender. God is just beyond our perception of the gender binary and how we experience and move through gender. Because God is, in the Catholic Church eyes, God's everywhere. God's everything. So how could God have a gender? So that's recently, I think there's some denominations of Christianity that are kind of complicating the way they think about gender in relation to theology.
And that's interesting too, because I know that that's also not a new thing. I'm sure there's some churches elsewhere that continue to understand the fact that God is not something we can technically comprehend. Actually, it's a very big thing in paganism, which is something that I'm interested in. I wouldn't say that I am a pagan or anything like that, because I don't practice very often. But the big thing with paganism is that God is a concept that we as human beings being created by their hand can't comprehend, because could a creation understand the thing that created them, So it's very much we just put a face and a name to that entity that helps us understand and connect with them.
Yeah.
Which is I don't know, I think that's really cool.
It is super cool, yeah.
But it's also a thing of I don't think we could ever comprehend God. But we're also kind of getting off the topic of Middle Eastern things
it's
here.
so far off.
But it's so I think it's important to talk about. Anyway.
I'm going to consider it relevant. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we're discussing gender and sexuality.
Yeah.
All right, moving on though. How we're going to wrap up here is kind of discussing women in Middle Eastern culture. Women. It's a time and a half. Something that I actually noticed while looking up things is that women don't get as harsh offenses as men do. I mentioned earlier, the thing between finding a gay man versus finding a gay woman. Gay men, killed upon first offense, but women get a couple of chances. And also, I believe it's the Persian Tales on the Couch, women are given less aggressive offensive than men are. I briefly remember seeing something in passing on one of these articles. Unfortunately, I can't remember, so take this with a grain of salt. Sodomy was only considered in this one culture an issue if it was between two men, but reproductive sex and lesbian sex was okay. So it's weird, because sodomy is supposed to be the any sexual act that is not purely for the purpose of procreation.
Yeah.
So it's weird to see how that changes over places, I guess. How come women are different? This one article, Persian Tales on the Couch, uses folk tales as kind of a discussion on how women are seen, at least in Persian culture specifically, and Iranian culture. I wrote that in the notes. Anyway, the Middle Eastern art scene is typically patriarchal. Basically, what this article discusses as a result of folk's tale is that the theme is that men are simple but kind and upfront and always there to be doing good. But women are more concrete thinkers and basically crafty and constantly trying to trick the men and stuff like that. It's in all of the tales explained, that's the main theme, is that women are basically to be feared, which is interesting.
That's interesting because I feel like that's not consistent with the women being punished less harshly, because you would think if women are to be feared, they would be the ones that I was honestly very surprised to find out that women not have it easier by any means, but they're not the ones that are instantly executed.
It's this double
it's a double standard, because you would think in a patriarchal society the men's lives would be valued and they wouldn't be the ones that would be killed on the first offense, but it's actually women who have
this is also the effect of coming from a culture that doesn't, well, we still do that, but doesn't do it to that extent. I almost wonder if it's kind of we're scared of women, so we're going to oppress them so much and also try to do things to like keep them around. Or maybe it's the certain value of like women as procreators, like they're what keeps the generation going. I don't know. This is also all outside speculation. Like, this is just us talking. Don't take this as fact at all.
No,
but,
I mean, like, it could be like you said from that article that it's like men are seen as kind and good. Maybe when a man goes against that perception of what is good, he's seen as faulty or whatever, and he's killed. Where women, it's like, oh, it's how they are. That's just women being women. Yeah. And they're going to be like, quote unquote, evil or whatever. But it might be they get more chances because we expect this behavior out of them or whatever. Where a man is like, how dare you step out of line like that?
It seems the reigning theme almost anywhere. I can't speak for every culture because I don't know about every culture. But the reigning theme from cultures that I know about is that toxic masculinity forces men into a very strict gender role.
Yeah.
But women are always, women or like feminine people are generally allowed to experiment more, and it's okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, like, an example in our culture would be women and feminine people can wear pants. And you used to not be able to wear pants. But men and masculine people cannot wear skirts or dresses. Like, they are subject to sometimes violence in our society for stepping outside of that gender role box. And so it's interesting how toxic masculinity has those iron bars that can't bend as easily as feminine traits.
But going back to Middle Eastern culture too, with that actually, cross-dressing is very much an offense. Like, I think you get like physically harmed for it. I couldn't tell you the exact offense, but anyone who is found cross-dressing, like, there's going to be issues. So, like, I wish I could say if women are treated differently with that than men, but unfortunately I just don't have the knowledge for that. What I do know is that transgender people in, I believe, Iran got legalized in 1987, but it was really just so that they could, like, the government could control trans identities through medicalization and, pathologization, saying that it's a mental illness. And by extension, being able to control homosexuality through that as well. If you recognize the terms, then you can oppress them from this government perspective. So I wonder if, like, cross-dressing is bundled under that transgender umbrella, but I don't know.
I'm sure it probably just depends on where you are.
Yeah.
And probably who you are. I'm sure that if you're wealthier, you probably get more leeway than if you're not.
And like discussing things in the Middle East is difficult because there are so many different cultures with many differing opinions. Like that's pretty much like half the conflict in the Middle East, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like you have so many different cultures coming together, and they've all been there for so long. Like all the I mean, that's like, what's this, like, humanity's cradle or something like that? Because, like, all humanity...
Because Mesopotamia.
Came out of that area. So it's, like, it's just so old, and, like, these things have been going on for so long, and it's, like, hard to talk about it if you're not there and experiencing it. It's, like, all we have is just what we see through media, social media, and the news and stuff.
For listeners who may not know, it's at least like how I digested this information was through art history, actually. The idea is that the Euphrates River?
Yeah, I believe so.
Like the Tigris and the Euphrates River or something was like literally any discussion talking about humanity's beginnings starts in that area because it's called the Fertile Crescent. It's where people started to farm because, fertile lands. Yeah. So that's in the Middle Eastern area, I believe, somewhere around Egypt. I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong about that. But
Middle East, Northern Africa.
Yeah. In that area. So when you've got a place with a lot of history, there's a lot to talk about. That is probably a good note to end on.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, since we're ending on that note, thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We hope it was informative. Remember to always check your sources. Make sure that you form your own opinions and look up things. It's very important to research things that you are into and not just take things at their face value. Mm-hmm. We are just biased participants in this discussion, quite honestly. So
very much so.
Please, by all means. Once again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you, Dree, for joining me on this podcast. I think it's always more fun to talk about things with someone than talking alone.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Next episode will be about post-colonialism, and it will be posted by the end of the semester. We are very sorry for this episode being so late. Dree and I both got COVID. And we didn't want to do this over Skype or anything like that. We thought it would be more important to do in person. So please forgive us for the very late posting of this episode, but we hope you enjoyed it anyway. Have a lovely day. Tune into our next episode.